Good evening, I'm Amna Nawaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. On the NewsHour tonight, Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, and their running mates all storm critical swing states with only a few days until voting ends.
We examine the trends from early voting data and what they signal about this year's election.
And the growing political divide over whether to trust election results, despite no evidence that the vote has been compromised.
We know that it's not easy because we know that, unfortunately, people have been fed lies about our election system now for literally 4 years.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Jim and Nancy Bildner and the Robert and Virginia Schiller Foundation, the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation, upholding freedom by strengthening democracies at home and abroad.
It really matters when you have an opportunity to give back.
Being part of something that's bigger than myself, that's what brings me happiness.
Being able to integrate your professional career with some of these other things that are important to you, it's critical to be happy at the end of the day.
You know, this is our community too, and we want to participate and give back to it.
People want those opportunities to make an impact and a difference.
The John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, fostering informed and engaged communities. More at kf.org.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. With 4 days to go until Election Day, Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump have dueling rallies planned in battleground Wisconsin tonight, mere miles away from each other.
But the home stretch is not without bumps in the road. Today, foreign threats of election interference sprang up in another swing state of Georgia. But we begin tonight in Michigan with Trump's latest stop on the campaign trail. Laura Barone-Lopez begins our coverage.
Donald Trump rounding the final lap of his third presidential campaign today, sticking with his anti-immigrant closing message.
All those people that illegally come across the border with their open border policy are taking the African-American jobs away.
The former president rallied in Warren, Michigan this afternoon, after stopping at a cafe in Dearborn, where he doubled down on comments he made last night. In Glendale, Arizona, he sat down with a controversial ally, former Fox News personality Tucker Carlson. At the center of their conversation, one of Trump's most outspoken Republican critics.
Is it weird for you to see Liz Cheney, that'd be Dick Cheney's repulsive little daughter, running against you with Kamala Harris?
Liz Cheney, the former Wyoming representative, crossed party lines to endorse and campaign for Kamala Harris. Trump talked about Cheney in violent and threatening terms.
The reason she couldn't stand me is that she always wanted to go to war with people. His daughter is a very dumb individual, very dumb. She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face.
This must be disqualifying.
Today, Harris told reporters Trump's rhetoric is dangerous.
Representative Cheney is a true patriot who has shown extraordinary courage in putting country above party. Trump is increasingly, however, someone who considers his political opponents the enemy, is permanently out for revenge, and is increasingly unstable and unhinged.
In a post on X, Cheney gave a cautionary response, writing, quote, "This is how dictators destroy free nations." Arizona's top prosecutor is reportedly investigating whether or not the remark crosses into a death threat under state law. That kind of rhetoric from Trump, in addition to his racist Madison Square Garden rally, has battleground voters who only recently made up their minds breaking for Harris by double digits. That's according to a Harris campaign official's accounting of internal data. Harris is also in the Midwest today, making a final push with multiple stops in Wisconsin, her first in Janesville.
We have just 4 days left. 4 days left. In one of the most consequential elections of our lifetime, and we have a lot of work still to do, but I know who's here. We like hard work. Yeah. Hard work is good work. Yeah. Hard work is joyful work. Yeah. And we will win. Yeah.
Meantime, both vice presidential candidates were in nearby Michigan today. Harris's running mate, Governor Tim Walz, in Detroit.
Folks, I get it. You're tired, you're stressed, you're ready for this thing to be over. There's one antidote to this, and it's the best one. Go out and vote for Kamala Harris to be president. That's it.
To vote for Kamala Harris is to vote for more of the same.
And Trump's partner on the ticket, Senator J.D. Vance, in Portage, before jetting off to North Carolina.
It is a vote for more of the same incompetent and failed leadership. And I think the state of Michigan, we're going to vote for a change.
In the final days, Trump's campaign has steadily ramped up lies about election fraud. It all comes as foreign adversaries are interfering. This video that circulated on X purports to show Haitian immigrants illegally voting for Harris in several counties in Georgia. U.S. intelligence officials said today the video was manufactured by Russian-influenced actors to, quote, raise unfounded questions about the integrity of the U.S. election and stoke divisions among Americans. Georgia's Republican Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, called the video of Haitians voting, quote, obviously fake, and urged Elon Musk and other social media leaders to take down such disinformation. On the campaign trail, it's full speed ahead before the polls close on Tuesday. Both candidates will end their nights in the Milwaukee area, the heart of the Badger State, where polls say it's a complete toss-up. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Laura Barone-Lopez.
Tens of millions of Americans across the country have already cast their ballots by absentee or early in-person voting.
So what does this early turnout tell us? Let's turn to Lisa Desjardins for a look at the data. So Lisa, break it down for us. Where are we when it comes to early voting?
We're in a really extraordinary moment when it comes to early voting. This nation has shifted over the last 20 years to today, this election, 47 states have early voting. There's only 3, New Hampshire, Alabama, and Mississippi, which do not have early voting. Let's look at the numbers, what we know right now. More than 55 million Americans have already cast their ballots at this point in the election. How's that compare to this point in 2020? Well, it is less, but it was a pandemic, and many people were essentially forced for health reasons to vote. So this is actually a history-making record number of early votes outside of a national health crisis.
And Lisa, what can we tell so far based on who has voted? What stands out?
There's a gender gap in these early voting returns. Right now, we see by far more women than men are voting, in fact, by 10 points. That's something that the Harris campaign likes. We see in polls, including our poll in October, that Harris really dominates with women. They believe the more women vote, the higher this proportion is, the better it is for her. Now, I will note, this is the same proportion as we saw in 2020 in that election. Joe Biden, of course, won in part because of the gender gap in this election. Now, these are just early votes. We don't know if these women are necessarily Democrats or Republicans. And I will say there is reason to believe that there are more conservative women voting this year, and I'll show you why, at least early. In 2020, if you look at the data, for rural and urban voters, it was about the same proportion of early votes. But look this year, look what we have. A gap. Rural voters making up a much larger proportion of the early vote than they did in 2020. And I can testify from being in Georgia, Virginia, this definitely has to do with Trump and his campaign pushing to try and get out their red voters, especially in rural areas. They are definitely showing up. Now, the question is, are these new voters or are these voters who would have voted anyway? They're just doing it earlier.
So, Lisa, you got at this a little bit. The big question is, where are those early votes going to? Which candidate? What do we know about turnout by party so far?
Which party? Yeah, not every state actually tells us the party identification of their early voters, but those that do, the University of Florida Election Lab compiled this, and it is close. Right now, 39% of the early vote that we know about from Democrats, 36% of it from Republicans. Now, Democrats had an advantage before in early vote. Republicans have clearly cut into that with their new strategy this campaign. This is the national vote. We all know that swing states are the ones that are going to decide this election. So let's look at the biggest one. Let's look at Pennsylvania. We actually have 2 counties there still early voting. Early voting was supposed to end Tuesday, but because of various problems, Lehigh County got extended one day. Bucks County still voting today. What I want to tell you about Pennsylvania is that here, Democrats had a 3-to-1 early vote advantage last election. Now that's cut down just to 2-to-1. Republicans feel good about that. But some experts, including Target Smart I talked about earlier, say those are not new voters, these Republicans who are showing up early in Pennsylvania, that they are those who would have shown up anyway. But we'll see on Election Day.
And Lisa, a question about Nevada, because there are Democrats who are concerned about the early vote in Nevada because Republicans are voting in greater numbers, voting early in greater numbers as compared to 2020.
Yeah, that's right. Nevada, we have some data on their early vote. Right now, it is overall for the state, we've got 34% of the early vote for Democrats, for Republicans, 39. And one reason is because here, the state's largest county, Clark County with Las Vegas, it's about even on early votes. Republicans are really happy about that. They think that that bodes good signs for them in the state. But as you know, Jeff and Amna, something you have to pay attention to in Nevada is actually those who have no party registration, which is the largest group of voters in this state. Many of them automatically registered, and Democrats believe some of them, many of them, might be young voters who just don't fall into these D versus R categories.
Lisa Desjardins, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Top United Nations officials today called the situation in northern Gaza apocalyptic, an unusually stark warning as Israel enters the second month of an operation targeting the area where Hamas has regrouped. Nick Schifrin joins us now. So, Nick, what did this warning say?
UN and U.S. officials are incredibly alarmed by conditions in Jabalia in the northernmost part of Gaza, where Israel launched a new operation 1 month ago, where thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of people have little access to food, water, or medicine. And so today, leaders of 15 UN and humanitarian organizations, including Oxfam, the High Commissioner of Refugees, the American heads of UNICEF and the World Food Program, and the World Health Organization, said, quote, "The situation unfolding in North Gaza is apocalyptic. The entire Palestinian population in North Gaza is at imminent risk of dying from disease, famine, and violence. The blatant disregard for basic humanity and for the laws of war must stop." Jeff, the statement also called for an arms embargo. The U.S. has been pushing Israel to allow more aid into northern Gaza and warns that if later this month the U.S. determines that Israel is, quote, arbitrarily blocking aid, indeed, some arms could be blocked.
And what has Israel said in response to this?
Israeli officials told me that Jabalia is full of Hamas fighters, many of whom participated in the October 7th terrorist attacks. And the fighting there is absolutely intense. One official told me Israeli soldiers have killed or detained more than 1,000 Hamas fighters, and it's simply too dangerous to allow humanitarian workers into the area. Israeli officials also point out that most of Jabalia's civilians have evacuated. You can see Israeli drone footage right there of civilians fleeing the area. They also say criminal gangs are attacking the aid trucks. But, Jeff, U.S. officials insist that, again, Israel must make provisions to allow more aid into northern Gaza, and they say that the risk of starvation right now is, quote, very significant.
Nick Schifrin, our thanks to you as always.
Thank you.
And we start the day's other headlines with the state of the U.S. labor market. The nation saw much slower job growth last month in the final such report before next week's election. The Labor Department's monthly tally shows that the U.S. economy added just 12,000 jobs in October. That's down sharply from the 223,000 new jobs we saw a month earlier. Economists say the impact of recent hurricanes and corporate strikes are at least partly to blame. The unemployment rate, meantime, remained unchanged at 4.1%. Speaking in Philadelphia this afternoon, President Biden told union workers the economy remains strong thanks in part to them.
I'm proud to be listed as the most pro-union president in American history. The middle class has grown. The middle class is growing. We're the best economy in the world right now because of you.
Looking forward, the U.S. Federal Reserve is expected to cut interest rates for a second time next week as inflation has cooled dramatically since its recent peak in 2022. That comes even as consumers and voters remain frustrated by the nation's high prices. In Spain, the death toll from this week's flooding has spiked to at least 205, with many more still missing. It's one of Europe's worst disasters in decades and the deadliest in living memory in Spain. In parts of Valencia in the country's east, more than a year's worth of rain fell in less than 8 hours on Tuesday. The floodwaters that followed piled up cars and smashed infrastructure. Volunteers are working to help those affected, but for residents, the impact of the flooding will be lasting.
Hay un montón de muertos. There are a lot of dead people. And what do you want me to say? No matter how much help we get, it is not enough. We need much more help, and no matter how much help comes, this is not going to be fixed in a month or two. We need a lot because it has done a lot of harm, and the harm is going to be fixed, but the people who have left won't come back.
Authorities have rescued more than 4,500 people trapped by the flood so far. More rain is expected in the coming days. India's capital was shrouded by a thick layer of toxic smog today. New Delhi's air quality index plummeted to a reading of severe as smoke from firecrackers used to celebrate Diwali polluted the air. In many areas, levels of deadly particulate matter were 7 times the WHO's safety limit. Diwali is the Hindu festival of lights and one of India's most popular holidays. Authorities have banned the use and sale of traditional firecrackers in New Delhi since 2017, but people often ignore the rule. A U.S. district judge has rejected Elon Musk's bid to move a Pennsylvania lawsuit over his $1 million election giveaways to a federal court. The decision comes a day after a Philadelphia judge put the state challenge on hold. City prosecutors sued the billionaire and his pro-Trump super PAC earlier this week, saying the sweepstakes may violate election law. Musk's super PAC launched the prizes in October. To qualify, voters must be registered in one of 7 swing states, and they must sign a petition supporting free speech and gun rights. It's unclear whether today's ruling will stop the giveaways before Tuesday's election. On Wall Street today, stocks ended higher as investors shook off the news of that weak unemployment data. The Dow Jones Industrial Average added nearly 300 points on the day. The Nasdaq gained more than 140 points after steep losses earlier in the week. The S&P 500 also ended in positive territory. Still to come on the NewsHour, the unusual way Nebraska allots its electoral college votes could be the deciding factor on Election Day. David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart weigh in on the final days of the presidential race. And universities transform their art museums into spaces for voting and political discourse.
This is the PBS NewsHour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington, and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
Returning now to our top story, the race for the presidency. Once the final votes of the 2024 campaign are cast and tallied, the final chapter of this election season may hinge on a blue dot far from any swing state battleground. Lisa Desjardins is back now with this report.
Omaha Democrats in deep red Nebraska embody the symbol of their movement, a blue dot on the state's political landscape. Nebraska law gives each congressional district its own electoral vote, and the dot unpredictably has come to represent how the area around Omaha could go to and be critical for Kamala Harris.
There's a focus on our district, and you feel like you matter.
We love the light shining on us this round. We're not being ignored. We're not a flyover state.
It started almost accidentally after Kamala Harris became the presumptive Democratic nominee Jason Brown spray painted a blue dot on an old sign to represent Democratic-leaning Omaha.
I'm like, oh, a blue dot. I love it. It was artistic. I'm like, stick it in the front yard. I love it.
Then the neighbors wanted one. And then the neighborhood. And ... I
looked like I was trying out for the Blue Man Group or an extra on a Smurf movie or something.
They have now printed and handed out nearly 15,000 of the signs, and everyone sees them, including Republicans.
I have a blue dot across the street from me, one house down. It's fine. I really do think that we need to be more accepting of the other side. There's one sign that's a big red dot eating the little blue dots, if you've seen that one. They're fun. You know, it's another way to express yourself.
Mary Harper is a grandmother, retiree, and volunteer neighborhood champion with Red State, Nebraska, devoting countless hours of her free time supporting GOP candidates up and down the ballot.
Well, both sides say this is the most consequential race in the history of the country. We do hear that every 4 years.
Every single electoral vote is going to matter, but here's why Nebraska could be the decider. There is a plausible scenario where Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin all go for Harris, and the remaining swing states all go for Trump. That leads to a scenario where Nebraska's one electoral vote, we mark that down here, could be the deciding factor. So if it goes for Trump, it's a 269 tie. That would likely lead to his win in the House of Representatives. But if it goes for Harris, it gives her the presidency.
Democratic VP candidate Tim Walz was born in Nebraska, and he was in Omaha last month, underscoring the importance to their campaign.
Hello again, neighbors. It's good to be home.
A recent New York Times Siena poll found Trump up 55-40 statewide, but Harris winning 54-42 in the Blue Dot District. If she won Omaha, she'd repeat Joe Biden's 2020 victory in the district and be just the third Democrat to win it in the past 30 years.
I am probably not that unique of a voter in Nebraska. I am splitting my ticket.
Kay Karn has mixed political feelings this year. She supported Nikki Haley, but left the Republican Party after Trump won the primary. She'll vote for Harris for president, and for Congress, the incumbent Republican, Don Bacon. She's still weighing her options in the surprisingly tight U.S. Senate race.
I really think the future direction of our country is at stake this year.
In the Gateway to the West, a theme. They feel they are also the gateway to the next presidency.
The stakes seem frightening.
We're at a critical path right now.
We have such different approaches for how we think this country should go and how it should be run. It's huge this year.
In Nebraska's Blue Dot, many visions for the country and one potentially decisive electoral vote. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Lisa Desjardins.
A recent survey from the Pew Research Center found that more than 40% of Trump supporters don't believe next week's election will be run well, despite efforts by lawmakers and election officials to address their concerns since 2020. Judy Woodruff explores what the gap in election trust may mean, part of her series, America at a Crossroads.
As Americans line up to vote early in person, drop off their ballots, or make plans for Election Day, many officials are bracing for an onslaught of conspiracy theories, protests, legal challenges, and even violence.
My concerns are not with the administration of the process. I'm very confident in that process. But I am concerned and hopeful that our country will accept whatever the outcome of this election is.
But we know that it's not easy because we know that unfortunately people have been fed lies about our election system now for literally 4 years.
There have always been a few doubters. There have always been conspiracy theorists who worried about whether someone was rigging the count.
Barton Gellman is a senior advisor at the Brennan Center for Justice, a nonpartisan think tank at New York University, where he's been studying how to protect democratic norms and institutions.
Those were never very large numbers, in part because their political leaders did not validate those false concerns. That's changed, and it's had corrosive effects on confidence in the electorate.
Gellman is a former Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who, in the November 2020 issue of The Atlantic magazine, warned that then-President Trump could attempt to subvert the election results to hold on to power.
This is a fraud.
On election night in 2020, Trump claimed victory well before counting had ended.
We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election.
In the days and weeks after, his supporters protested the results through Stop the Steal rallies and dozens of court challenges, virtually all of them rejected on the merits or on questions of standing. Ultimately, Trump attempted to stop the vote certification on January 6th.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
More than 1,000 people have been prosecuted and found guilty for their actions that day. In late 2022, Congress passed and President Biden signed the Electoral Count Reform Act, strengthening counting procedures and clarifying roles between federal and state actors. In a recent cover story for Time magazine, Gellman examined that law and other updates to our electoral system, speaking with officials across the country, including in key battleground states, about whether our voting system will hold up against baseless challenges this time around.
I asked election officials in all those states how confident they are that the ballots would be counted as cast, that when they were canvassed and audited, that the counts would hold up, and that whoever won the most votes in their states would get that state's electoral votes when it went to Congress. And all of them said 100%. They really were completely confident. I found that the system has worked very hard to address the worries that people had about the last election. It's worked very hard to address the false rumors that were spread or the false accusations that were made about the 2020 election.
According to a recent survey by the Pew Research Center, most Americans do trust that the election will be run well. But like many things, that trust now tracks partisan lines. While 9 in 10 Harris supporters told Pew they believe the election will be run smoothly, just over half of Trump supporters agreed. This is a marked change since 2018, when Pew's data showed high confidence among supporters of both parties' candidates that the midterm elections would be run well.
As things stand right now, there is a 0% chance of a free and fair election in the United States of America.
Earlier this year, the Heritage Foundation and the Texas Public Policy Institute, two conservative think tanks, held an event marking the release of their 2024 Transition Integrity Project, a report summarizing exercises they conducted with participants from varied backgrounds to consider scenarios they say could threaten the legitimacy of the election. The report asserted that the lawlessness of the Biden administration makes clear that the current president and his administration not only possesses the means, but perhaps also the intent to circumvent constitutional limits and disregard the will of the voters, should they demand a new president.
The main findings are that we have seen an acceleration of lawfare and the weaponization of government institutions that in name should be neutral, but have cast their lot more or less with the Democratic Party.
I spoke this week with the report's principal author, Adam Ellwanger, a professor of English at the University of Houston downtown, who was a fellow at the Claremont Institute, another conservative think tank.
I think that the American people may be tempted when we hear Kamala Harris saying that Trump is a fascist, that this is literal Hitler. I think normal Americans are tempted to think, oh, this is exaggeration. I think that we need to take them at their word. And if you believe that a literal Hitler is poised to take over the government of the United States of America, you will not honor that result.
For the record, Harris has said she believes Trump is a fascist, but did not call him Hitler. The report did not mention the events of the last presidential election or President Trump's refusal to say he would accept the election results in 2016, 2020, or in the run-up to this current election, were he to lose. In each of the two scenarios they considered, Trump won. The project did contemplate some unusual hypotheticals, like Barbra Streisand being kidnapped by Hamas militants, and the FBI arresting Trump at Mar-a-Lago 2 days after winning the election.
Well, I think that especially the last 10 years of American life in politics has been defined by scenarios that we could not have anticipated. In real life. If we said that we would see a presidential administration doing an armed raid of a former president's residence, I think we would have said that's preposterous. That will never happen in America. And so for these reasons, we decided that we needed to really test the system by running scenarios with events that would be highly unanticipated.
Ellwanger also questioned whether Harris, in her role as vice president, will certify the election results in the Senate should President Trump win. The Electoral Count Reform Act clarified that this is a ceremonial duty.
Will Kamala Harris do a transfer of power when she oversees a joint session of Congress? Nobody's asked her, so we don't know.
Vice President Harris has been asked if she would respect the results of the election, whatever they are, and she said yes. So she has been asked those questions, and she has said that she would respect the results, whatever happens. As you know, former President Trump, so far, he has not said he would accept the results of the election.
Is there a question in there?
I'm pointing at, you just said that she hasn't been asked, or she hasn't said this, and in fact she has said.
If you'd like a response to that, I would say she said lots of things and then changed her mind after the fact on virtually every issue.
He also warned that if results aren't known on Election Day, they should be questioned. A critic would say this report looks like a pretext in case former President Trump loses the election, for people who support him to say there was something wrong, and this lays out what's going to happen. Is it a pretext in so many words?
I don't think it's a pretext. I do think that many of the fantastical situations that we imagined have already occurred. I invite your viewers to read the report. Things that only 3 months ago people were saying, well, that won't happen, has already happened.
As an example, he pointed to ongoing conservative efforts in a number of states to prevent non-citizens from voting, including through purging names from voter rolls whom they suspect don't have citizenship, which the Department of Justice has sued to block as a violation of law. This week, the Supreme Court ruled that Virginia's purge of 1,600 names could go forward, despite the fact that officials there haven't proven any of the names actually lack citizenship, and some U.S. citizens said they had been removed. Stepping back, it is illegal for non-citizens to vote in federal elections, and studies have found almost no cases of it happening, despite the Heritage Foundation and other groups continuing to assert that it's an issue.
Judy, I mean this in all respect, all due respect, but you keep citing that these institutions have said there's no evidence of this or that. Right. The problem here is that they've said this so many times where there is evidence of this or that that's later proven, or where they've said that there is evidence of this or that, say Russian collusion or a lab leak with COVID, right? Where we later found out when they said that there was no evidence that there was, we simply feel like we can't trust these institutions anymore.
What Heritage is doing with that exercise is to amplify what Donald Trump himself is doing, which is to try to convince the public that our election is going to be corrupt, that you cannot count on the institutions of democracy to run a fair election.
Returning to his own reporting, Bart Gellman says Americans should feel confident that official results will accurately reflect the outcome, but that getting to the result will also require patience.
What's going to happen is that the votes will be counted. You'll get unofficial results early, then over a period of days, and in some cases over a week, you'll get a canvassed, audited, verified official result. And that's when litigation will be, coming into play. If Trump loses, he's going to try to overturn the election. And the system, I am confident, will block him. And the public should have confidence that when the system says who won the election, that tally is accurate and secure.
Words of confidence and trust in a country where those are becoming rarer and more partisan notions. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Judy Woodruff in New York.
For what to watch for in these final days of voting, let's turn now to the analysis of Brooks and Capehart. That is New York Times columnist David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart, associate editor for The Washington Post. Great to see you both.
Hey, Amna.
All right, so the race for the White House is as tight as ever. There's nothing markedly different in this latest mayor's poll I'm about to show you, but I'm going to show you anyway, because it gives us a sense of where we are still in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, and in Wisconsin, in these key battleground states. Vice President Harris has a 2 to 3 point lead. It's all within the margin of error in each of those states. But guys, I want to step back for just a moment, away from the polls and the details, because we are in the final days of a truly unprecedented presidential and election cycle. Who these candidates are, how they got to the top of each of their tickets. So when you step back, Jonathan, from the day-to-day headlines, how are you looking at this race? How would you describe it and this moment in American political history?
Well, the first thing I say is, praise Jesus, we are 4 days out and that this is almost over. But in all seriousness, I would say of all the presidential campaigns that I have watched and I have covered, this is one where the contrast between the two candidates could not be more stark, could not be more plainly evident. I think that what we're about to see in this election, there are lots of polls, and the polls are all over the place. The polls are all tied. But come election night, we're finally going to hear what the American people have to say. And the fact that I feel optimistic, but not overly, like, yes, so-and-so is going to win, gives me some trepidation. If anything, I'm more worried about what happens when a winner is declared and the reaction from the American people who didn't win.
David, what about you?
Yeah, I see sort of two big historical plot lines. Since 1970, American policy, like a policy around the world, has been geared toward moving our economy and our country toward a post-industrial society. And every policy, including immigration policy, education policy, trade policy, social policy, has been directed toward and benefited those of us who are college educated and are doing well in the information age economy. A lot of folks, not only in our country but around the world, are saying that was wrong. Those people have benefited, we've been left behind, and we need somebody who's going to right the wrong for those of us less educated. To me, the most interesting polling data of this week was that if you contrast college-educated women and high school-educated men, there's a 43% gap between these two populations and who they're going to vote for. The educated women going Democrat, high school-educated men. So that's one massive storyline. The second is the more obvious one, which Lisa's just been talking about, or Judy's just been talking about, which is we've had norms, institutions, and structures in our society based on the idea of liberal democracy, that politics is a competition between partial truths, that if we lose this time, we'll win next time. And therefore, it's all within bounds.
Yeah.
And that is being eroded by Donald Trump. And not only that is being eroded, the basic norms of our democracy, but the norms of the Western alliance. You know, I worry that NATO won't be around in 3 years if Donald Trump wins. So those are two big storylines. One of them, which I think is supportive of Trump and makes understand why he's here. The other one makes you want to run for the hills.
Well, there's norms also just around our discourse, how we talk about things, the things that are said and acceptable. Garbage was one of the most frequently used words in our headlines this week. We saw that Madison Square Garden rally. A former President Trump had speakers that called Vice President Harris the Antichrist. They called her a prostitute. They called her low IQ. And you have both covered a lot of elections. Jonathan, is this a new low we're at when it comes to the discourse?
Yeah, I mean, how far beneath the sea can you go? And whatever that number is, that's where we are and that's where we have been. I think what Donald Trump has been doing in the closing days of this campaign is shameful. I mean, last night, in addition to saying what he said about Congresswoman Liz Cheney, he called Kamala Harris a, quote, sleazebag. That's the language he has been using, not just yesterday, not just at that Madison Square Garden rally on Sunday, but throughout his campaign. And that gets to why I'm really looking forward to Election Day, because the American people will choose not just what kind of country they want, but what kind of person they want to lead them. Someone who embodies or tries to embody the aspirations of the American people, or someone who plucks at grievances and threatens retribution and uses language that belittles, that disrespects, and makes it possible for him to do a whole manner of things that even 10 years ago would not have been imaginable.
David, you mentioned it's Donald Trump who's upended a lot of these norms. Does it change if he loses?
I don't know. You know, I was at a church in Tennessee. I decided it would be interesting to go to a Christian nationalist church. And so I went to this, and I have to say the congregation was sincere in its faith. Sometimes you think Christian nationalism is all about politics. These people were clearly moved by their faith. But, you know, the pastor up there in the pulpit is calling Kamala Harris satanic. There's crudity. It's just like, I was at that church, I thought Donald Trump fit into something. And it wasn't only at professional wrestling, it was in churches. It was pre-existing in the churches in the neighborhoods. And it was just this culture of the narcissistic cult leader. And I saw it at the church, and I think Trump is a version of that. So I don't know if we go, like if Trump exits the scene, I'm not sure we go back. We've got the professional wrestleization of American society that's out there.
But in terms of what that means for real-world implications, I mean, Jonathan mentioned the Liz Cheney comments. For anyone who missed it, he last night said, you know, in calling Liz Cheney a war hawk, also suggested that she should have guns trained on her face. This is a man whose supporters did listen to him and march on the Capitol and fight, as they saw it, for an election they believed what was stolen. What happens if his supporters listen to him again?
Yeah, well, then we're in for dark times. I think his vocabulary is an attempt to offend us, and his supporters thrive off our offense. And so it's sort of a symbol, and all the populist leaders all around the world are doing the same sort of stuff. But it means that you can't have politics, you can't have friendship amid political difference. I just read a long Politico story on two brothers who are on either side and can no longer speak to each other. And that, of course, has been the story we've all felt and witnessed over the last number of years, when it becomes, when one side is trying to offend and the other side is naturally offended, then it's hard to have relationships across political difference.
Jonathan, how do you look at it?
I don't know, this whole campaign and what we've had to witness, particularly from Donald Trump, has been painful. Because as an American, I think I've said this many times before on this show, I grew up under 2 terms of Reagan, under a term of H.W. Bush, 2 terms, I was an adult, 2 terms under W. Bush. I thought I knew what Republicans stood for. I thought I knew what Republican leaders stood for, where their boundaries were, what their lines were. And they were completely obliterated in one presidential term of Donald Trump. And over these last 4 years, we've seen not just the lines obliterated, but just completely gone, to the point where Republican leaders of conscience and goodwill are cowed to not say anything. to not do anything to try to turn the tide, take their party back from this man, to bring back decency to our political discourse. Sometimes people ask me, what would it take? And I say it would take a Republican Party that en masse would come forward and say, that's not right. That's not what we do as a party. That's not who we are as a country. And you must stop and hold the person accountable. They didn't do it with Trump. They haven't done it with Trump in the 9 years he's been in our faces. And I don't expect them to do it again, which means come Tuesday night, we will be in a different America.
David, we've got 4 days until the last day of voting. Does it feel to you like either candidate has momentum right now? And do you care to make a prediction?
Yeah, I thought obviously when Kamala replaced Joe Biden on the ticket, she clearly had the momentum, and that was noticeable in the polls. Then she clearly plateaued, and it looked like Trump had the momentum for probably 2 or 3 weeks. I don't hear a thing right now.
No.
I think I believe in the wiggle at the end of the term. I think there's always a wiggle, and the wiggle shifts people. But I don't know where that wiggle is or what's causing the wiggle. I don't want to say the word wiggle too many times.
I think you've already crossed that line.
I think 3 or 4 times is good.
But I've never in my life been so confused about what's going to happen. I have no clue.
Jonathan, equally confused?
I don't know if I would say confused. Okay. To answer your question, I do think that the vice president has momentum, but I'm not making any predictions because we just don't know. And the thing that, again, I'm looking forward to on election night is finally hearing from the American people. Because if there's one thing we all in our profession need to have at this time is a sense of humility. We do not know, no matter what those polls say, and we will find out Tuesday into Wednesday.
We will indeed. Jonathan Capehart, David Brooks, always great to see you both. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And of course, Jonathan and David will both be with us next Tuesday when we'll have live election night coverage. Join us for in-depth analysis as the votes are counted. Our live stream online begins at noon Eastern, then special coverage right here on your PBS station starts at 7 p.m.
Ahead of Election Day, a project at several universities is fostering a different type of civic space to encourage young people to discuss issues, engage with each other, and vote. Senior arts correspondent Jeffrey Brown went to the University of Michigan to see how this works as part of our series, Art in Action, exploring the intersection of art and democracy and part of our Canvas Arts and Culture coverage.
Last Saturday in Ann Arbor at the University of Michigan, a campus alive with energy amid the crisp beauty of fall, a big football game that evening against Michigan State, and something else, the first day of early voting, with a long line of students in an unexpected place at the university's Art Museum. Museum Director Christina Olson.
Because we are in a state that is hyper-polarized, because there has been a kind of more recent history here of violence and extreme rhetoric around elections, around politics generally, I think that art museums are fantastically great places in which people can, especially students, especially young people, can begin their careers as voters.
In an ugly time in American politics, can beauty play a role, even a small one, in serving democracy? That's the goal in a large-scale, nonpartisan project of art and civic engagement involving university museums from across the Big Ten, many in Midwest battleground states, like here in Michigan, where principles of design are being applied to voting itself.
One of the earliest things that we realized was that on our campus there was a big gap between registration rates and voter participation rates.
Some of the barriers for students are logistical in terms of clarifying information, and some of them are the psychological barriers. So where can design play a role? Where can art and design play a role?
Stephanie Rowden and Hannah Smotrich, professors at the School of Art and Design, head the Creative Campus Voting Project, which partnered with the Ann Arbor City Clerk's Office to turn a museum space into a voting hub, where students can ask questions, register, and vote in a space designed down to the smallest details to make it a welcoming and even pleasant experience.
It's actually a really interesting creative problem. It has so many different dimensions to it. So we get to think about color and form and space, and we are able to also think about the kind of social, relational element that's happening here. After all, this is both, voting is an individual experience, but it's also a collective experience.
Senior Matthew Cohn never imagined he'd cast his first presidential vote in a museum.
I think now in our political climate more than ever, it does feel a little bit scary to vote. It feels scary to kind of have conversations with friends and peers about who you're voting for, what party you align with. And I think any effort made to kind of familiarize the vote, whether that's putting it in a museum or spreading education about the ballot as a whole, is always going to be a positive thing.
Several other university museums in this project, including the University of Wisconsin-Madison, University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and Rutgers, are also serving as registration or voting centers. Others have special exhibitions focused on issues of democracy and civic engagement. Among them, Penn State's Palmer Museum of Art offers politics in daily life, with a range of imagery around patriotism, injustice, and protest. Michigan State's Broad Art Museum is presenting a poster project on gender representation. And at the University of Oregon, a focus on what's happened in Latin American countries when the rule of law breaks down. Back in Ann Arbor, there's also an exhibition with colorful walls and a colorful and provocative title, Hey, We Need to Talk.
If we can't speak to each other, I don't know how we have a democracy.
And so Philippa Pham Hughes created a space within the museum, commissioning wallpaper art with the flowers of all 50 states, choosing works from the museum's collection, and making talk happen by bringing together people from different political points of view for dinner. A kind of artwork, she says, that requires an action from its participants.
The first action is to have a conversation. And for me, it sounds simple and kind of obvious, except that having a conversation in this day and age feels like a radical thing to do.
Hughes calls it a social sculpture.
I've created this space for a dialogue, a relationship to happen, but that artwork is incomplete until the dialogue actually takes place. So once people come and sit at that dining table, the artwork becomes complete.
Chloe Nichols and Sebastian Rojas Garcia, who are both voting for Kamala Harris, have taken part in past dinners. Nichols says she was surprised by the tone and topics.
I was expecting some type of political conversation, and then we had a very serious conversation about the way that the current generation is thinking, just having all of this access to technology and then being through so many life-changing events in their lifetime, and how we're treating this current election and how we're looking at the phases of our future.
For Rojas Garcia, the conversation replicated the pointed but respectful debates he has within his own more conservative family.
Often you feel that, like people feel as if choosing one side is just so divisive that they don't even want to talk about it just because it'll end up in some sort of argument. But at least when my family is arguing, individuals just want what's best for the country. And I'd rather have the argument than not have it.
So does Kyle Brown, a junior voting for Donald Trump, who took part on the evening of our visit.
I guess if you told me there's going to be a nonpartisan talk, I wouldn't expect the art museum, but I think it was a cool thing. I mean, I'm not the most artistically inclined person, but I like seeing the different artworks and how they connect to one another with the We Need to Talk theme. I thought it was really interesting, so I will say I'm a little surprised, but hey, it's provided a good opportunity.
Changing minds, that's not the intent. But changing civic engagement and tone, that's a definite goal of this entire project. And an important one for public universities, says Museum Director Christina Olson.
It means something to be a public institution. It means something to go into have public goods like museums and libraries. They're not a given. They do really important, really critically important work for the civil society and the democracy, even if it's often kind of invisible to people. And I think it's worth naming so that you can really protect it.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor.
And our weekly digital show this week looks at the promises Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have made along the campaign trail on climate change, healthcare, and foreign policy. You can find PBS News Weekly on our YouTube page.
And don't forget to watch Washington Week with The Atlantic tonight here on PBS as the 2024 presidential campaign comes to a close. Moderator Jeffrey Goldberg and his panel discuss the closest race in memory, how we got here, and where the country's headed under a new president.
And on PBS News Weekend tomorrow, we check in on Wisconsin politics as the control of Congress and the White House hangs in the balance. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Amna Nawaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. For all of us here at the PBS NewsHour, thanks for spending part of your evening with us. Have a great weekend.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by and with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Kathy and Paul Anderson, and Camilla and George Smith. The Walton Family Foundation, working for solutions to protect water during climate change so people and nature can thrive together. The William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, for more than 50 years advancing ideas and supporting institutions to promote a better world. At hewlett.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. The final night of an extraordinary campaign. Will voters send Donald Trump back to the White House?
We stand on the verge of the 4 greatest years.
Or will Kamala Harris make history? A PBS News special, Election 2024, Tuesday, November 5th at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 Central.
You're watching PBS.